Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. That is Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. I'm your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey. I am grateful to be with you today as we kick off National Adoption Awareness Month. We have an important voice in the adoption triad with us, an adult adoptee. Today we have Jacob Sturges. Jacob lives in the Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota area and is the youngest of 3 siblings, one of whom was also adopted from Mexico. Jacob recently graduated from North Central University in Minnesota with a Bachelor of Science in Humanitarian Leadership and holds his ministerial credentials with the International Ministerial Fellowship. He has spoken in churches and schools, conferences about his family's journey of international adoptions, as well as how to love, care, and serve orphaned and vulnerable children, youth, and families. Jacob has traveled to several international countries, and this past summer, he returned to his birthplace and homeland, South Korea. Please welcome to the show, Jacob Sturges. Hey, Jacob.
Hey, Sandra. It's good to be with you.
I'm excited to have you on the show again. We've known each other for a long time, having served together on the Orphan Sunday leadership team and connecting at CAFO, CAFO's annual summit every year for, I can't even count how many years, a lot of years, right? You were a show a long time ago, you were a guest on the show a long time ago, but, not all of our listeners may know you because it's been quite a while. So let's just start with your story. You're an adult adoptee. How old were you when you were adopted? Kind of unpack that story for us.
So I was adopted at the age of 15 months from South Korea. And just a little bit of my birth family side of things is that my birth mother was 31 years old when she had me. She was a seamstress. Both of her parents had already passed away, and that she had no other children at the time that I was born. All I know about my birth father is that he was 10 years older than my birth mother. But how they actually met, how my birth parents met, was through a mutual neighbor, friend, acquaintance, and they ended up moving in together in the spring of 1987. And about several months later, my birth mother found out that my birth father was actually married to someone else. Wow. And I can only imagine what might have went through my mom's head, finding out that she had been living with someone else's spouse, and all that. And so she makes the choice to leave him, and shortly thereafter she finds out that she's pregnant with me. And again, I can only speculate or imagine this, but you leave the man that you have loved for the past 6 months or so, and now you find out that you're pregnant. Your parents are both gone. You have no support system there. And in a country that has it, that's a culture of honor and shame, having a child out of wedlock, becoming pregnant when you're not married, there's that shame, there's that guilt. And but she decides to press through. She decides to make the choice to parent, to give birth, and to parent. Um, I was born on August 22nd, 1988, and as I have shared with many others, is that she does whatever she can as a single parent, no matter what the circumstance is, no matter what the challenge is, no matter the situation, she makes that choice to love, to care, and provide. She makes that hard choice as a parent to do that. And she does that for several months. She presses through, and I truly believe that that determination has been passed down to me because I am that same way. I am determined. I continue to press through. And so, but I became very sick shortly before a year old. And I think that's when she knew she could no longer parent. And she makes the hard and difficult choice that any parent, no matter where they are in life, no matter the circumstance, no matter the challenge, she makes a hard decision to relinquish her rights as a parent so that someone else could step in and provide. And so she decides to do that. I end up, she sends me to a children's home, which later then I was placed into a foster family in Korea. And I would spend several months with that foster family until I was adopted and brought over to the United States. And so, again, it's that determination of love that as a parent she made. And so, yes, there is that brokenness, that pain, and that suffering in my birth family story, but there was also pain and brokenness in my adoptive family's story before I came to the United States. My adoptive parents suffered the loss of four miscarriages before I came to the United States. Um, my parents were married before, and that relationship with their first spouse is there. But in the midst of all that brokenness and that pain, my mom had um a daughter from her first marriage, and my oldest sister and I love each other. We are about 14 years apart, but um there is that restoration and that celebration aspect. My mother's has since told me that adoption was never on her radar as a mom. It was actually my dad who brought up this topic of adoption. And my dad was the one who wanted to possibly look into what adoption was and what it looked like. And like any parent's dream of starting a family, adoption is just one aspect in how to start a family. And so they began to they were in touch with an adoption agency and they started that process. And as you know, Sandra, as an adoptive parent, how long that
Yes.
process can be. And so they started that process, and on December 15th, 1989, at the age of 15 months, I came to the United States. Um, there were several layovers before I got to Des Moines, Iowa, but I was one of 5 Korean children on that flight from Denver, Colorado to Des Moines, Iowa. And that December cold night, everyone on that flight from Denver to Des Moines were let off first. And no matter where they needed to go, no matter what connection they needed to be at, they witnessed and saw where all 5 of those Korean babies would be placed into a family.
Mm.
And so, again, there's that aspect of that beauty and that celebration and joy of adoption. 10 years later, after my adoption, my parents decided to do another international adoption, and that was through Mexico. And we decided to adopt my sister at the age of about 12 and a half years old.
Wow.
From Mexico. And so I have 2 older sisters, and my older one is again adopted. And so adoption has always been part of not only my own story, but my family's journey and how that has been. And so,
I love that. I love, first of all, that your birth mom uh, chose life for you, and she, really, really tried to do right and to raise you to the best of her ability. I've interviewed another adoptee some time ago, and she referred to her birth mom as her life-giving mom, and I
yeah,
love that. You know,
yes.
and then then your adoptive parents' story, and just how really for every member of the adoption triad there is loss and there is
Yes.
grief there. So you point that out very eloquently as well. So grateful that your life-giving mom said yes, and I'm grateful that your adoptive parents here in the States said yes. And I can only imagine, we traveled to Ukraine to bring our kiddos home. But I've heard stories of families who wait at airports for their babies.
Yes.
So that's always such a neat part of the story as well. So you grew up knowing you were adopted. What was that like for you? What was, adoptees can struggle with identity, all of that. So what was it like for you growing up knowing you were adopted?
So growing up, like you said, I knew that I was adopted. I knew that I was loved. And I remember growing up, probably up till about 7, 8 years old, I would have my parents tell me this bedtime story, and they would tell me the story of how I came to the United States. It was all the information from my adoption papers of what they knew, and I would ask them, tell me how I came to the United States. And so they were very open about it, and I encourage adoptive and foster families, parents to be open appropriately, but be open to be able to share because, like you said, there are identity issues that foster and alumni face. And so, um, but I would probably say when I was about 10, 11 years old, I stopped asking what that question was. Who am I? Where did I come from? And I wrestled with it probably through my teenage years, through my 20s, and I really struggled with who am I? Um, and I really didn't start diving into this conversation of identity as an adoptee probably until I was in my 30s.
Mm.
I'm 36 years old. I'm in my mid 30s. And so 6 years ago, I didn't start diving into this conversation of identity. And as followers of Jesus, we say that our identity is in Christ,
Mhm.
but we also have to consider as human beings, all human beings are part of some group of people. And so it to have that sense of identity, you're part of someone, you're part of some group of people. And I never grew up with people that were Asian or Korean, and I really struggled with it. The only time that I remember ever being a part of being Korean was my taekwondo instructor and his family.
Mhm.
We knew them for about 3, 4 years. But then when they ended up leaving Iowa, where I was raised, there was really no connection beyond that.
Mhm.
Um, Even faith as a church, um, there were not a lot of Asian descents in church. There were a lot of white Caucasian families, Latino, Hispanic, Black, African American, but there were not a lot of Asian descent people that I could learn from culturally. And so I really struggled when I moved to Minnesota in my 20s. Minnesota has one of the largest Asian populations. And so my parents thought it'd be a great opportunity for Jacob to experience that. But I didn't. I really did not experience any of that. I was really afraid of stepping into my identity as an Asian American. Um, Being a Korean adoptee, I didn't know what that meant. And so I really struggled with it until I had a college assignment that I had to do. And that is when I started diving into that.
Wow. So would you say to our foster and adoptive parents listening, if you're caring for or parenting a child from um another race, right?
Mhm.
How important is it to weave that the different cultural things, holidays and foods and all of that into their everyday part of their life? Would that have made a difference for you, do you think?
I think it would have. It would have given me some sense of identity of this is part of who I am. Um Again, we may disagree how cultures may experience religion, but if we as followers of Jesus step into learning about other people's cultures and religions, we could also incorporate this is how they experience their culture and religion and foods and celebrations. This is what we as followers of Jesus do, and we can incorporate that together. I really truly believe that that is possible, but it does take time,
Yeah.
and parents need to be discerning of how to do that appropriately.
Yeah, and every kid is different. So my four
Yes.
siblings that were adopted from Ukraine, we did try to weave in, we've got Christmas decorations that I bought while I was in Ukraine. Every Easter, there's
Yep.
a Ukrainian deli nearby. Well, not too nearby, but close enough by. I would go and I get
Yes.
all the little treats and snacks and different things. And where, so some of my kids, I still have one daughter who, when it is her birthday, I have to make borscht. Like it is the
Yes.
rule, right? Which is like I'm due to make borscht because it's that time of the year. But so
Yeah.
I do those things, and then I've got, one of my older boys is kind of like he just wants to be American. He's
Yes.
all US of A and
Yes.
doesn't even want to talk about Ukraine. So,
Yeah.
it depends on the kid really, but I
Yes.
think it is our due diligence as adoptive parents to provide those
Yes.
opportunities for our kids. Because it's not like you didn't know, right, that you
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
born in South Korea
Yeah.
and clearly, and even, I mean, even my daughter who was a kinship adoption, her mom had passed away. There was a father out there somewhere she had never met. And it wasn't like she never thought about him, even, so
Yes.
we have to respect that, and obviously our kids are going to be thinking about these things. And
Mhm.
I think parents can play a key role in supporting whatever,
Yes.
the kid needs, in answering their questions and providing those opportunities. And if they choose to take them, they do. And if they don't, they don't. But it's
Yes.
important. So, Jacob, I know you understand the impact of trauma on children and how important attachment was. So what was that like for you? Did you have great attachment with your adoptive parents? Did you struggle with any of those things that we know so much about when it comes to kids from hard places, as Dr. Purvis called
Yep.
them?
Yes. So yes, I had great attachments. I will tell you that my parents have reminded me when I first came, that I would hold my breath. I would hold my breath and pass out. And they actually took me to the hospital shortly thereafter, and tried to do a bunch of tests, making sure everything neurologically was fine, and all the test results came back negative. So everything was fine. But they did mention that because of the loss that I had experienced,
Mm,
not only the loss of my birth family, my birth mother, but also the loss of my foster family.
yeah.
Because again, you're spending time and you're attaching with that family, and when you finally are adopted, you are detached and in that way, and now you're having to reattach to someone brand new. And so it was I would say it was very hard for my parents to be able
Mhm.
to do that. Also my oldest sister and I were very close growing up. She would love me, care for me. I would sit on her lap. What one of the things that they have said over the years is when we drove back to where my parents were living, I would I wouldn't sit in the car seat, and so I sat on my sister's lap, and I was completely satisfied. I was fine, this and that, and so there was certain people that I would attach to, and I think that is something that is very key when you are adopting or fostering is to have know those people who know those people where the children are going to attach to and be able
Mm,
to have that support system for that parent or that sibling that wherever that child's going to attach to. And so, but yes, I was more attached to my dad than I was to my mom when I came to the United States. But over the years, um, again, I attached with my mom. So
So you have a good relationship
yes,
with your adoptive parents.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Love that. So Jacob, I also know about you. You love the Lord. You have a relationship with God. So was that always the case, or did you have a turning point? I know we discussed identity and you said you were in college when you began to really deal with that. So at what point did you have a turning point with your relationship with the Lord?
So I grew up in the church my entire life. I accepted the Lord when I was about 5, 6 years old, baptized into the church about 7, 8, 9 years old. And so growing up, I knew that I was loved by God. I knew that I loved the Lord. Um, but I also think as you get older, you discover things about your faith, your
Mhm.
belief system in God. And identity was probably something that I struggled with in my late 20s, early 30s when I started going back to college. And I began to really wrestle with how do you identify as a follower of Jesus, but also hold on to your identity as a Korean adoptee? How do you hold both of these things together? And if both of these things exist, can they intertwine together? Is that possible? And I I believe that you can. I believe it is those hard, difficult questions about faith that you begin to navigate, that God truly does care for everyone, every race, every color, every identity, um, no matter who they are, what the circumstances are. We see a God in scripture that he calls Abraham and his descendants to bless those who bless you. No matter who they were called to be a blessing. As followers of Jesus, we are all called to be a blessing to those around us. No matter whether they or we agree with each other, we are so excuse me, we are so called to bless them. And so that is probably when I began to navigate through this identity of being a follower of Jesus, but also as a Korean adoptee and living in that identity as a whole person, as a person who is a Korean adoptee, who is also a follower of Jesus. And I can share the gospel via through that. And it is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And so you came to that place where you understood,
Yes.
I'm first and foremost adopted by God. You have a heavenly father who would never leave you or forsake you. And you were able
Yes.
to kind of hold both places.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that. I love that.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets Neurobehavioral Model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphansny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphansny.org/hope-community.
So my next question that I wanted to ask you about, that I know this past summer, something really big happened. You took a trip to South Korea. Tell us about, how did that come about and what happened there?
So in 2020, I decided that I was going to go back to college. And I decided to go to North Central University and pursue a bachelor's degree in humanitarian leadership. And in that course of time, my prayer during those 4 years was, God, open my eyes to see things that you want me to see and learn things that you want me to learn and challenge my faith to grow. And I will tell you, those 4 years grew my faith. And so earlier this year, during my last semester, one of my very last classes was a cultural anthropology class. One of the assignments was to write a paper on the religious aspects of anthropology and do it through a cultural context. And so I thought, like I shared earlier, Minnesota has one of the largest populations in the country. And Minnesota was one of the very first states to welcome Korean adoptees after the Korean War in the 1950s. And so I thought, could there be Korean churches that I could possibly check out and do this assignment? I remember going to a Korean church once growing up, and it was fantastic. But again, I never grew up around it. And so I was a little bit nervous of what I might find here in Minnesota. So one of the churches that popped up in a Google search was the Korean Presbyterian Church in Minnesota. They were the only church out of the list that had an English speaking service. Now, I didn't know any Korean, so it would have been really pointless for me to go to a Korean church without knowing the language. And so I decided to go to this church. And when I walked in, there was maybe 20, 30, 40 some people, and they all looked like me. They all looked like me. And I was completely amazed. And I thought, I'm no longer the minority in a church like this. And so I was introduced to Pastor and Mrs. Park. And Pastor and Mrs. Park leads a ministry called the KIM Center, which stands for the Korean Adoptee Ministry Center here in Minnesota. And I had did a search on the KIM Center several years prior to this for another college assignment. And but I was introduced, and they said that they help provide support for Korean adoptees here in Minnesota as well as around the country, through emotional support, mental support, cultural and language support, and understanding that there is a large need for support for Korean adoptees. And so they also mentioned that they also provide a scholarship for Korean adoptees, adult Korean adoptees that have never gone back to Korea, and to give that experience to adult Korean adoptees to learn about their heritage, to learn about their culture, the language, the history, the foods, but also learn about how to navigate this journey of their adoption into a faith-based journey as well. And so through that, that is how I got a chance to go back to Korea. I was uh, one of four recipients nationwide to participate in this spiritual journey back to Korea this past summer.
Wow, that's incredible. So you applied, you were a recipient and you got to go. Did you go as a group? Like all four of you went together?
Yes,
Wow.
yes, we were all there were two of us that were from here, from Minnesota, and then there were the other two were down in the south part of the country. But we all flew to Korea, and it was an incredible time. The 2 weeks that we were there, we learned so much about our culture, our heritage, the language, the history, and also the aspects of this is where we all came from. This is
Mm,
who we are. I think as adoptees who are adopted internationally, um, sometimes feel this disconnect from their birth country and thinking that that's not part of their story. But it truly is
it is,
part of
yeah.
their story, and that they can hold true to that as part of their own. So,
Mm. So you got to experience the food and the history and the
yeah.
geography and all of those things. And something else happened while you were there in South Korea. Tell us about that.
Yes. So we had already been in Korea for about 5 days at this point. And I had already gotten in touch with the adoption agency that I was adopted from and petitioned a birth family search.
Wow.
I got an email from the social worker that they had received the address of my birth mother,
Wow.
and that a letter was going to be sent, and this was on a Wednesday morning, and we would wait and see if she would respond. I didn't know how fast the mail service would be, if a letter was going to be sent, or if there was ever going to be a response. But our group finally made it to Seoul on Friday afternoon, so 2 days later. And Friday afternoon, before I went with my host family, I was told that contact had been made with my birth mother and that arrangements were going to be made to meet her.
Wow.
And so arrangements were gonna try to be made on Monday. So 72 hours. I had all this time to think about what
Wow.
just happened.
Yeah. What was going through your mind? 72 hours to anticipate possibly meeting your birth mother.
Yes. So I will tell you, I was completely floored. I was from Wednesday to Friday, I just thought an address, that's perfectly fine. I would be satisfied if we got a response. Maybe not meeting her, that would be fine. But to now know that arrangements were being made to actually meet, I was so emotionally drained at that point
Yeah.
because I thought, I'm in this room with about 20, 30 some people, with the other three recipients, Pastor and Mrs. Park from the camp center, and then all of our host families are in this room. And I just break down and cry. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. I remember going to bed that Friday night at about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and I wake up the next morning at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm laying in bed and I'm crying.
Mm.
I'm thinking, I'm here by myself. I'm here by myself in a stranger's home that I have just met. How do I process this? And I began to cry out to God, and I said, God, give me the peace, give me something that I can hold on to these next 72, 48 hours until this actually happens. And I remember the Lord giving me this passage of scripture at the beginning of this year. Be still and know that I am God.
Mm.
The psalmist writes that in Psalm 46 and says, be still and know that I am God. No matter the circumstances, no matter what is going to come out of this,
Yeah.
I am going to hold you. I
Mm.
am still in control. I'm going to take you and bring you and hold you in the palm of my hand.
Mm.
And I remember just processing that and praying about that all weekend long. And then Monday morning came, and
Mm.
I go to the adoption agency, and I sit down with the social worker and going through the papers and updating my file. And then she ends up calling my birth mom. My birth mom is not mobile, meaning she wasn't able to come to the adoption agency. And so we were given the opportunity to go to her home.
Wow.
And it was about an hour subway ride from the adoption agency. And I I have never cried
Mm.
as much as I did the next 90 minutes as I did the 5 days prior to this. Walking down the street and seeing her and sitting in a 5 by 6 room that she had, sitting on the floor of a bedroom and just
Mm.
holding hands and crying and weeping and just trying to be present of all of that. I am just amazed at how God used everything for this moment and to allow me to meet my birth mother.
Wow. So I assume you had a translator.
Yes.
So will you share any of that conversation between you and your birth mom?
So there wasn't really a lot of questions. I had a lot of questions going through mind at that point, and I was encouraged to ask questions, but I think I just wanted to be in the moment.
Mm.
I wanted to hold on to that moment, um, because it had been 35 years.
Yeah.
35 years of wondering, is my mom alive? Is Where does she live? Is she a follower of Jesus? And I remember um asking, giving her a Bible that I had received from one of the churches that welcomed us in Korea. And I found out that she had been a believer for 2 years at this point. And
Wow, what a
so to
gift.
know that,
Yeah.
that was the most important thing ever. And so Mrs. Park and then my host mom that I had been staying with did most of the translating. But again, there wasn't really questions or information that was really exchanged. But I did find out that I actually have a half brother.
Wow.
I found out that I had a half brother who's about 10 years younger than I am.
Wow.
Um, Different father, but she actually decided to parent that child, my younger sibling, my younger brother, and to um know that I have always wondered if I had any other siblings, to know that that is part of who I am, part of
Yeah.
me, um, is truly exciting. And
Yeah.
so, we are trying to make it work where we are trying to do letter corresponding to make that happen. But it again, it was just remembering that moment, those
Mm.
moments of being present. It really wasn't the questions that were more important. It was just
Right.
holding that moment and
Yeah.
never letting that fade away.
Wow. So what was your birth mom's response to meeting you? Could you share any of that?
So what she had said was the day that she relinquished her rights as a parent,
Mm.
she wept. She wept for days,
Mm.
nights,
Yeah.
praying that one day there would be a chance that she would see me again,
Mm.
knowing that there was a family in America that was willing to step in and provide for my needs.
So she knew you were far away in
Yes,
America.
yes,
How hard, how hard. So the likelihood of her ever meeting you again
yes,
was nil, really.
yes,
But then here you were.
yes.
What kind of like, was there relief, gratitude? What do you think she felt?
I think she felt gratitude. She felt, I think, at peace
Hmm.
with, again, the shame that she may have carried for all those years.
Yeah.
Again, in a country that has this honor shame culture, to have a child out of wedlock, again, there's
Yeah.
that shame, there's that guilt, and then to not be able to provide for
Hmm.
your child,
Yeah.
there's also that shame and guilt.
Mhm.
And I remember writing a letter to her. Um, and my host mom translated the letter. I said, I hold no regrets, and that I forgive you for every wrong that you may have felt,
Mm.
because I know that you did this out of love.
Mm.
You did this out of love, not because of the mistakes you made or the guilt or shame that you felt from others. You did this out of love.
Mm. Wow. So you gave her that freedom
Yes.
from that shame. Wow. Has there been more correspondence since that trip? Because you've been home. That was this summer, so you've been home several months.
So I have written a letter to her, but I haven't gotten the response yet. And so I'm still hoping that there is possibly that opportunity to be able to still reach out. I do have several connections here in Minnesota that has encouraged me to continue the possibility of letter corresponding and connections to them. My and then my host family said I ended up staying with this past summer in Korea. I know that I could reach out to them as well.
Yeah. Wonderful. And you mentioned a half brother. Was there an opportunity to meet him, or that has not transpired?
That has not transpired. What I found out was my half brother found out about me the day of.
Oh, wow.
So I can only imagine what he may have felt, what he is trying to process, what that looks like.
Wow.
He may have always felt like he was an only child, and now there's another person in the picture, and
Yeah.
to navigate through that.
Wow. So to be continued there, there may be
Yes,
connection in the future. So
yes.
so overall, Jacob, what impact has this had on you? You've now met your birth mom. You've had that experience in South Korea. How has that affected you?
I would say it has brought healing and wholeness um in my identity as a Korean.
Hmm.
Like I shared earlier, I've always wondered if I could be welcomed as a Korean, as a Asian American. But also understanding that you can hold both of these things of being a Korean adoptee, but also a follower of Jesus. You can hold both of these in this space of grace, in
Hmm.
this space of grace that you can hold this humbly and say, God loves you. God loves you no matter who you are. God still loves you and he welcomes you into his family. And so I would say that is something that I have continued to learn, that this identity in Jesus is also very welcoming in my identity as a Korean adoptee. And I can hold that together.
I love that. Do you still attend the Korean church that you found?
I haven't had a chance to visit them again, just because of my schedule right now. Now that I have graduated,
Yes,
it's been a
congratulations.
little Thank you. It's been a little hectic in being able to reconnect, but that church definitely is very close and dear to my heart.
Yeah. So you graduated from college. What are you doing now?
So, right after graduating in May of this year, with a bachelor's degree, I ended up applying for a job with Loaves and Fishes. Loaves and Fishes
Oh,
is here in Minnesota. They have been in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area for over 40 years, helping provide healthy and nutritional meals for those in need who struggle with hunger and homelessness, and to be able to help provide those healthy and nutritional meals and resources needed for individuals.
oh, I love that. Love that you're in that space. Um, and you've been enjoying that work. That's awesome. Another question for you. You chose the verse that we opened with, actually, Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Why that verse?
I always knew at a very young age that God had called me into ministry. No matter what that ministry or what that platform or leadership role that might be, I knew that I was called to advocate on behalf of those who are orphaned, those who are vulnerable, those who need someone to know that there is a God that truly cares for them, no matter their circumstances, no matter their situation. And I knew that through the prayers of my adoptive parents, but also the prayer that my birth mother said. She prayed for many years that I would know that there was a God that loves me. And so, again, it's understanding that God has called me to speak on behalf of those who are vulnerable, no matter their situation, no matter their circumstances. And I love sharing my family's journey of international adoptions and being able to help provide resources for foster and adoptive families who are going through different and difficult challenges, and
Yeah.
to
Well,
be able to do that.
yeah. Well, speaking of that, as you know, most of our listeners are adoptive and foster parents, facing difficult challenges. So would you leave us with an encouraging word for the parents that are listening?
I would probably say to memorize Psalm 46:10.
Mm,
Be still and know that I am God. God truly hears your cries, your heartache, your disappointments, even your frustrations. God hears that when your child may be throwing a tantrum, or maybe in the circumstances where you as a parent don't understand, know that God hears you, He sees
mm,
you, He knows you, and He holds you in the palm of His hand. And so memorize that. Let that be a prayer on a continual
mm.
basis that God is still in control.
I love that, Jacob. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, for being such an inspiration for our listeners. And be blessed with the work that you're doing there with Loaves and Fishes, and being that voice for the vulnerable. We really appreciate it. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Sandra.
Wow, my goodness. Thank you for listening to this episode today. I hope you were inspired by my conversation with Jacob Sturges. Hope you didn't have to use too many tissues, but what an incredible story, and a story of hope, and a story of encouragement. And for us parents and caregivers on this journey to know, be still and know that He is God and that He has us, no matter what our concerns and worries and challenges might be. So thank you for listening. In addition to inspiring you through this podcast, which is, I believe, a valuable resource for you, I also want to equip you for your parenting journey. You heard about the support group, Hope for the FASD Journey, at the top of the show there. And I also offer one-on-one parent coaching. So if you know or you believe you're raising a child who was prenatally exposed to alcohol or other drugs, and you want some guidance and you need some tools and you want to do more of a one-on-one session, I do that, as well as online and in-person training and workshops. So I talk about this a lot because most people don't realize that prenatal exposure to alcohol is the leading cause of developmental and learning disabilities worldwide. 1 in 20 school-age children here in the United States has been prenatally exposed to alcohol, much higher, much more prevalent than autism. And I believe it's only going to increase between drinking among women during COVID increasing, pregnancies increasing during COVID. And I actually just led a training at a rescue mission for the homeless population here in my city. I trained some staff who work directly with women and children, and they reported that actually they're seeing an increase in alcohol addiction because people are starting to stay away from drugs because they fear fentanyl is laced in so many drugs, and they don't know that. So they're staying away from the illicit drugs, and they're focusing more, on drinking alcohol. And I believe that we're going to just continue to see a higher rate of FASD, in across the board in the United States, and especially in adoptive and foster placement. So it's imperative that every foster, adoptive, and kinship caregiver understands this, because most of the kids that come to us are either undiagnosed or they're misdiagnosed with a whole bunch of other things. Families are really struggling. I know what that feels like. I am a mom of a 19 and a 21-year-old, both diagnosed when they were little with fetal alcohol syndrome. They both still live home. We spent years trying to figure out, how to help them. There wasn't a lot of resources out there. We became trauma informed, did the connected parenting stuff, which definitely helped. But, when there's prenatal exposure to alcohol, it's like next level. You need next level strategies and tools and understanding. So that's what we're here to do. We want to provide those resources for you that I know I didn't have in those early days, and that still there's not a lot out there. So make sure you check out our website, justicefororphans.ny.org. Click the training tab at the top of the page, and you'll see FASD in the drop down. Every month I offer a free 90-minute online workshop. So you have to you can either follow us on social media or go to our website to find out when they're scheduled for, because I kind of, sort of shuffle them around so that way they fit, somebody can always find one that fits their schedule. Check out that free session. I also do deep dives, longer sessions. So again, just to learn more about the support group, the online training and sessions, and the coaching, go to our website, justicefororphans.ny.org. You can find all of those resources there, and check out my personal website where I blog about FASD, and that is at sandraflach.com. Be sure to find and follow us on social media. Justice for Orphans has has Facebook and Instagram, as well as myself, Sandra Flach. So look us up there. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and leave a review to this podcast. I greatly appreciate it. links to everything in the show notes for this episode. And now that I land the plane, I just want to say that I am grateful that you chose to spend your valuable time with me today. I am thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans, and check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.